You let your brother handle it, right? Good evening. Glad to see all of you here this evening. I don't want to skip ahead of tonight's class, but if you're here on Sunday morning, you will be regaled with a tale of athletic prowess from me about 30 years ago. I will not tell you any more, but you will be wild. We will continue talking about the genealogy of Jesus. And if you were paying attention to the scripture reading, John chapter 18, 36 and 37, you'll notice numerous references to the word king and the word kingdom. And we're going to talk about that this evening. And as you can see, the subtitle for this evening is The Rightful Heir to the Throne. And when we talk about this genealogy of Jesus, we have sort of two different roads that lead us to here. We have Abraham, and then we have David. And I don't mean to imply that they're different paths. That's not exactly what I mean, but they sort of serve as two different references. So for instance, when we talked about Abraham, we talked about a promise, as it were. And when we talk about David, we will be talking more about a king. And as you can see here, the central to the identity of Jesus is his descent from David. And David is Israel's greatest king. We use the word greatest there, not in a measure of who did the best, but who's considered the greatest, who ranked as the greatest in the eyes of the Jewish people. In Matthew chapter 1 and Luke 31, we talked about both of those. We've read and looked at both of those, and those are listings of the genealogy, and they both mention David. They go about it a slightly different way. Matthew chapter 1 and verse 6, the spotlight is on the descent of David down to his son Solomon. The Bible says there, or Matthew writes there about Solomon. And then in Luke chapter 3 and verse 31, we are mentioned through another son of David, and that's the son Nathan. You'll remember Matthew goes from start to finish, and Luke kind of goes backwards from finish to start. But we talk about a king. I want you to think for a second, kind of a mental image of what you think about a king. And if I give you a minute or two to think about what you have in mind, I would say we'll all be similar in our thoughts. How many of you immediately thought of a crown when you thought of a king? What color was it? Gold. Interesting. Everybody went gold right there, right? We immediately went to there. Did anybody have any other images that came up when you thought about a king? Tom, a scepter, right? That sort of staff that you would hold. Anybody else think of that when they think about a king, all right? What else maybe popped into mind? Robe, probably an old worn out coat, right, Jimmy? I'd say most of us thought of a pretty fancy robe, right? Maybe purple or maybe red or gold or something like that. What else maybe comes to mind? A throne, a fancy seat, an elevated seat. We have that image of a king, right? And we have that image not out of just fiction or made up, but based on things that we've seen, images that we've seen, descriptions that we have seen here throughout history as well. But Jesus's kingship was not political or earthly. And that's going to be hard to grasp, not just by us maybe today, but by people back then. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. John chapter 18 and verse 36, he declared that my kingdom is not of this world, which seems a paradox, right? That's not a sentence that really makes sense. My kingdom is not of this world. All kingdoms are of this world. I can point to kings and queens and monarchies and rules. So that doesn't really make sense. But he says, my kingdom is not of this world. And instead of overthrowing Rome, Jesus instead establishes a spiritual kingdom. And he rules not over a group of people in the sense of a type of dictatorship, but rather through their hearts, through their minds, through their lives there as well. And his resurrection then makes him a sort of eternal king. Every king that has ever lived has also done what? Died. And John the First moves on to John the Second and third and fourth on down the line, right? And when you look at them, John the First might have been good, but John the Second was pretty bad. And John the Third may have been somewhere in between, but they all lived and they died. But Jesus's resurrection made him a little different as well. So we're going to talk about this rightful heir to the throne. Let's start first by saying that Abraham was before David. You can look at that in the Bible. You can look at that in the genealogy. That Abraham's group, the people that we put with Abraham, were sort of wandering around, right? What had Abraham been promised? We talked, I think there's three things we talked about last week. All the nations of earth would be blessed. So they were promised land, they were promised a nation, and they were promised a blessing. But they were sort of wandering nomads, for lack of a better word. They had to move from point A to point B, and then they moved on a little bit more even after that. But Israel is an established entity by this point. And Israel has a king, and David is that king. And the people seem pretty happy with him, although we can find certain flaws in David along the way. Let's look at 2 Samuel chapter 7. This is verses 12 through 16. Jimmy, you want to read this one, sir? So you can see some sort of similarities in the reading here with what we read last week about Abraham. But this promise of a kingdom forever sort of becomes the central hope of the Messiah for Israel. But I want to think about this in maybe a sort of political king sense. Why would a, quote, kingdom forever sound perpetuity? Meaning what? It's going to continue. Uh-huh. 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 Okay. Why else would it sound good? So it's going to continue. It sort of eliminates the past worries that were with it. Why else would it be important to hear? Well, I got one more if nobody else has it. Okay, so that might be a bad thing. So one of the things that throughout history most kings have done is they wanted to make sure that it was set up for whoever was going to come after them. And they sometimes didn't do this the right way, but it was set up for somebody. And sometimes there were kings who were near death who had two sons, and they were both terrible. And what's the right answer here? You know it's going to go to pieces. Well, if you are promised a kingdom forever, it sounds pretty good, right? I don't have to worry about these goobers that are going to come after me. It'll probably work out all right. And so when we think about it like that, there's this sort of political on earth thought that was coming up. Now, in truth, was that what God is talking about right here? No, we're not talking about the crown and the robe and the throne and all that kind of stuff, but that's where we're going to go a little further here. From this moment forward, this Messiah that has been thought of is now going to come through the line of David. It had to, right? Because it has to come through. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. You can say you're the king or queen of England, but if you're not related to him, you don't have much claim. Well, Jesus's claim would go through David right here. So we're narrowing down who could potentially be the Messiah. Who could that be is being sort of narrowed down. So I want to see a couple of questions. Why would it be essential for the Messiah to come through or come from David's line? That's where the promise was from. So he could be rejected. This group. Now, I want us to think about this second question and think about it for a second before we maybe answer it. How does God's promise to David shape Israel's expectations, both good and bad, of a coming, that really should probably say Messiah rather than king? Okay. Okay. How else might this sort of promise have good and bad?
There is no way they could have expected that this king would be born in manger. This is not how you become king. They weren't wealthy, rich, and famous.
Right.
He defied all expectations.
Sure. What else?
It's like us. It would be hard for us to picture a king in Paris. Like if they said that King Charles lived at home now.
Right.
He's not King Charles.
Right.
He made big mistakes wrong. He was not.
Right.
King not homeless or got wrong or killed or something like that. I imagine King Charles was pretty comfortable situation. This is what King said. Jesus never had that.
So if we fast forward from whenever 2 Samuel was written to whenever Jesus lived, we look at this sometimes and we say, why did they not how could they not figure this out? How did they not know or believe who Jesus was? Well, every Jewish person who had ever lived from 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 through 16 to the day Jesus was crucified had been hearing about a future Messiah, a future king, right? And so when I ask you at the start, what do you describe as a king? You all described what we would be looking for today. And it does not match with what Jesus would be. And so it was a difficult thing for them to sort of wrap their head around. It's supposed to be a king, but he doesn't look like a king.
It's like us whenever we read a book and then they make a movie out of it.
Uh-huh.
That sounds nothing like the character.
Yep.
Because we've got that voice in her mind.
Uh-huh.
Or that doesn't look like that character. Look may not even say what he looks like. We develop this image.
Absolutely.
What we read, what we take into it. And no different than for the Jews.
So before we get into any more of that, though, I want to go back to where we left off. David's king, all is well, everything's great, perfect in every way. But then things stop being so perfect. But I want you to read this. This is 2 Kings 24, verses 10 through 17. All right. Now, I want you to remember what we just read, 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 through 16. And want you to remember that essentially that could be boiled down to two words. They would have a kingdom forever. And I tell you what, 2 Kings 24, verses 10 through 17 sure seems to contradict that, doesn't it? What happened in 2 Kings chapter 24, verses 10 through 17? King of Babylon. Notice this does not say Nebuchadnezzar, king of Israel, kept things going smooth and it was great, right? They're taking over. That seems to contradict the idea of a forever kingdom, right? So if you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, all's supposed to be well, and now it's not well, this is a problem. Not only in that, did we also read that what happened to Jerusalem? It was sacked, it's besieged, it was destroyed. What is Jerusalem to the people of Israel? That's the holy thing. Well, wait a minute. Now, I might be able to grasp the thought of a new king, but the capital being gone, that throne that we talked about is gone. That doesn't seem right as well. What happened to the temple? Burned, right? The temple burned, the temple destroyed. What happened to David's descendants? Carried away into captivity. Wait a minute. Those are the people that has to be the next king. Had you experienced that? What does the eternal throne look like to you if you're living in about 2 Kings 24, verse 16?
Well, if you go back to the promise, the same promise of God that your kingdom will be forever. He says, if you does wrong, then I will chastise you.
Okay, so we're not worried about the does wrong. We only heard the good parts, right? Kingdom forever. So if you're living about this time, what's this kingdom forever look like? It is all gone. We have been lied to, might be the thing. Now, Ben, would be a good time for you to mention, what if we had read everything except for the parts that we really wanted to hear? Now you can say what you're going to say.
Well, and that's the good thing, too, because he says, I will chastise him, but
Right.
he says, I will have mercy on him.
Mhm.
I will remember him. So, if you read all that, this is temporary.
Uh-huh.
God will discipline us, but he's going to have mercy and he's going to bring us.
Why is that difficult, though, in when you're living in it? Why is that difficult? Long term's hard to see. Short term is a little easier. And so I asked this question, and maybe we've already answered it, but how might the exile have tested Israel's faith in God's promises? Hard to see it, right? I mean, we just read here, the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, Jehoiakim's uncle, king in his place and changed his name to Zedekiah. None of those people are descendants of David. So it's hard to see it right then. Why else might exile have tested faith? When is your faith usually riding high? When things are going well, right? Everything's going well, faith's high. When is it most challenged? During bad times, during the loss, during sickness and illness, during when your job, you lose your job or whatever. When things are going bad, that's when it's challenged. Well, it can't be going much better than it is for them right here. And you can imagine the challenge that they would have faced. Now, I do think it's interesting that this segment that we read is actually referenced by Matthew as well. Let's look at Matthew chapter 1, verses 11 and 12. Mel, do you care to read this? You can tap out to somebody else if you want to. Jeconiah. Shealtiel. Just do that. You got it. Zerubbabel. All right. Now, I say this, I tell you these two verses here for a reason. Because had we read 2 Kings 24, 10 through 17, this period should have been the end of it, right? Because I'd say that when people were living in this little period, this little dot right here, they said the show is over, right? They can't go any further. But notice this Jeconiah, I guess, theoretical bad guy in the story, the person who was in charge of Babylon when they took over, he begot Shealtiel, and Shealtiel begot Zer. Notice, time doesn't stop. It keeps going. We've talked about this quite often. We look at things and we say, well, why didn't God do it this way? But go back to that full list in Matthew chapter 1 of all of those descendants. Were they all good people? Were they all perfect? Were they all people that had the best interest of the children of Israel at heart? But did it keep moving? It did. The genealogy continues. Maybe quietly, maybe not riding up here, but coming up out of the trough just a little bit there as well. Names still appear. Generations still move forward. Jeremiah 29, 10 through 14. So this will make yours is probably easier. So when we go back there just a second ago to that period I pointed at, I would say that there were people who uttered the Hebrew version of this phrase. It can't get any worse than this. You can almost guarantee it, right? I'd say that phrase has been said probably more than just about anything that's ever been said in the history of the world. But it says right here, let me make sure I've done the right thing. Yep, right here. It says, for thus says the Lord, after 70 years are completed, I will return you to this place. 70 years is a long time, right? Pretty good ways. But the promise there still exists. But it didn't promise that things are always going to be perfect. Things are always going to go great. Things are always, everything's going to be swimming. And it's not necessarily promised like that. But the promise does still exist. So what does it tell us about God that he preserved the lineage even in destruction, even in judgment, even during bad times, just to make it dumb down? Faithful when we are not. All right, so take all those and mush them into one, and you got a pretty good one right there. Do we always understand it? No. And I think that's important for us, but the same for every generation of people who've ever existed, right? How often are you confused by things? Daily, right? I wonder why that happened, right? We think about that all the time. Wonder why this happened. And if we look at it in a longer term, it's challenging as well, no? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. Tom. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. We tend to think awfully highly of ourselves. You live in a world of 8 billion people right now. And for most of us who've been around for a while, there's been more than 8 billion people, because a lot of people have already come and gone in our lifetime, and there'll be more that'll be afterwards. But we want it to all make sense to us right here in this particular place. And it just doesn't always work that way. And I'm, as they would say, preaching to the choir here, because I'm just like you. I fret about it and things bother me and worry about it. but we have to sort of move beyond that. But it's hard. And as Tom said, we look back thousands of years at it and we still don't really get it. And people look back at us 1,000 years from now and say, well, why didn't they do this or do that? Just the same as we would do as well. Right. So what do you do in your life 2026 right now, you personally? What do you do in your life when things don't seem to be going great? We'll put worry as number one, draw a line, and let's look at positive things after that. Pray. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Whatever your answer is, except for Sue Ann's, whatever, and maybe Sue, I don't know. Whatever your answer is right there is probably something that I'm going to use the word comforts. It may not be the right word, but whatever it is that comforts you. So Ben's answer and my answer might be different, but they're not necessarily one right and one wrong. But whatever it is that sort of helps us go through, it is a affirmation, or maybe to use a word up here, a reaffirmation of what took place. And during this time, there were prophets that were reminding the people, it will be okay. Maybe not right now, but long term. That's what we read in Jeremiah just a second ago. I want to look at two of those examples right here. This is Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7. Tony, do you care to read this? So now, nobody that was living and reading Isaiah wrote the day he wrote this was probably ever going to see Jesus, the time frame. But this is a comforting thing. It says, for unto us a child is born, a son is given. Notice this, us. What does the us mean right here? Children is to the whole group, right? It's not to a specific person. And it says the government will be upon his shoulder. And this would be comforting, right? Because the government that they were living through at the time was they were under its thumb here, as it were. And his name, notice these words, wonderful, counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Now, nobody ever called Jesus that, but what do those words mean when they're saying it? There's not a single negative word up there, right? If I were to describe someone as wonderful, how would you feel about that person? You would feel great about them, right? If I said that this person can serve as a counselor for you, you would say, wow, I could use that, right? When I asked you a minute ago, what do you do when things are going wrong? Sometimes we seek counsel. Maybe from somebody professional, but maybe from just somebody who's went through an experience such as. All of these different things were very positive for people to read when they were going through a difficult time. Let's look at another one. Psalm 89, 34 to 37. Maria, do you care to read this? This is what Ben was saying there just a few moments ago. That even during difficult times, Isaiah says there's somebody coming. There's comfort coming. And the psalmist says, I will not break my covenant. I will not alter the word that has gone out. I will not lie to David. Now, it may take a while. And it may not be in the time, because I'm pretty sure the people in Babylon were like, be nice to this. Can we expedite this? Can we roll it forward right now? That's not necessarily how it worked. But we're the same way. We sometimes want it rolled forward, but we have to be comforted by the words, by the promise that exists right there. No king sits on David's throne, but if people were assured that the covenant would still stand. A couple questions. Why would God repeatedly restate his promise during times of trial and failure? That's when you needed it, right? That's when you need it. Again, I asked you a minute ago, where's your faith when things are going good? I don't have to be really retold it, but I need it when I'm down here, right? So sometimes saying it, repeating it over and over again. Well, I told you once. Well, that doesn't cut it. Sometimes you need to be told multiple times right there. How does repeated assurances then strengthen faith during long waiting periods? Right. So how can we relate this to our lives today? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Like you asked what would do when things are shaking up and we don't know what to do. The reason I say study is because faith comes from here.
Mm-hmm.
Go back and read the Bible. Again, get that repeated assurance over and over. See how God did it. That'll match up with history. How he did it. And that will help you if you've been with your long period.
Others?
I like the part where it says, like you see the sun or you see the sun. No matter what bad thing happens today, just say 5 million people die.
Right.
The sun comes up.
Yeah.
The moon will be displaced. You know, that's just God telling you, look around,
Mm-hmm.
see how still all is not wrong.
Any others? So it's something I want us to consider and I want us to think about, because we do have a tendency to, again, make ourselves sort of the center of things, but to realize that others have went through it. Now, we're going to skip ahead a good period of time to Matthew chapter 1 and verse 1. And if you read Matthew chapter 1, we've read this multiple times, but it says, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. We'll stop here for a second because we're looking at all of the relatives of Jesus. The son of David, the son of Abraham. He's not a son in the literal sense, but straight down the line, right? And so we see here when Matthew is written, sometime after Jesus' death, that there is a connection that's made to both. You've heard the saying, all roads lead to Rome, right? It's an old saying that meant it was the most important place, and no matter where it went, all roads lead to there. If you've ever been to Letcher County, there's a sign that says all roads lead to Isom. I can't verify if all roads lead to Isom, but they all did lead to Rome way back when. But what that meant was it's all going to come to here. Well, in a sense, what we've seen here is these roads have led where? Or led to who? To Christ, right? They've led to Christ. Are all roads, Tom, are all roads going to Isom good roads? Some of them ain't great. I've been on. You can get a peach knee high in Isom. It used 20 years ago. You used to be able to. I don't know if you still can. But not all the roads were great. Were all the roads leading to Jesus great? Was the road going through Babylon great? Not great, but it got there, right? It got there. It was comforted. It was fulfilled by that. All the promises converge right here. This is the fulfillment of the blessing from Abraham that Ben said just a few moments at the start of class. It's the fulfillment of the eternal king through David. But again, it's not a political kingdom. It's not an earthly kingdom. Pilate is confused by Jesus' response in John chapter 18. But it is an everlasting kingdom. And that's what's most important. A couple questions for us to go home with. How does Jesus fulfill God's covenant in a way greater than Israel originally expected.
They would have thought it was just for me.
Uh-huh.
And his covenant expands that, big time over
Uh-huh.
everybody. They could never have seen that.
Uh-huh. Any others?
Like I said, the kingdom without end, Jesus is forever in eternity. He's not going away, he's not going to get sick, he's not going to die, he's not going to get corrupted or buried out. He's forever.
Anytime there is a worldly kingdom, there has to be worry that it could go away. How many of you served in the military? How many of you know somebody who served in the military? Why does the United States of America have a military? Never know, right? Yeah, I mean, some could happen. Probably not, but something could happen. And so you always have to be worried and thinking about that. This eternal kingdom, do you have to worry about any overpowering by another country or a nation? No. This is something different. And we've kind of already answered this, but how does seeing the long arc of God's promise affect your trust in God today?
You saw his promise through the plain, and they saw the field and cross, and through Jesus. They did everything we can understand that and the promise of eternity that I'm going to give you.
Mm-hmm.
That should buoy us up. We know that. We don't know that how you get out here. But it's that. So we trust up.
How else?
Right, we have a tendency to try to put our trust in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And this takes a great note on all this. We see, hey, they failed one right after the other. But God still carried them on, He still carried them through. Just because they failed, didn't mean God was letting them fall.
Mhm.
It's the same way with me. I fail daily, but I don't trust in myself.
Right.
I trust in God, so you have to hold up.
Others? This one last one. You can answer it out loud or you can just think about it to take it home with you as well. But hopefully there's encouragement for us from this lesson in when things seem delayed in our own life, right? Because we pray for things to happen, if that was our answer a minute ago, or we study to figure out why things happen, if that was our answer a minute ago, or if we're being real honest, we worry about things happening and why they don't happen. But hopefully we can be encouraged by this story that it doesn't always happen on our time frame, right? It doesn't always happen in our time. Is there encouragement in that for you? If everything happened the way you thought it should happen, what would happen when it didn't? You would be totally lost, right? So, but because things don't always happen, it actually causes us to pray, to study, to think a little bit more, to look back at past examples and past experiences there as well. So I hope that there's encouragement in that for us. Questions before we call it a night? We have a couple of more. I think Tony went and got it, show. We have a couple more of these, and then I'm still batting around ideas about what we'll do next. I don't know what it'll be. This one has been a little more challenging on my end than I was anticipating. I kind of jumped in the pool without a plan, and I felt like I've been kind of trying to doggy paddle just a little bit. All roads are leading somewhere, Tom, and I don't know where we're going, but hopefully we'll get there before the tire blows out. But hopefully it's been enjoyable so far. I think it's been an interesting. We sometimes do sort of look at that genealogy and just say, well, it happened. But there's a lot of stuff that's there. And I was hoping tonight that we could look at things kind of bad and try to put ourselves in the place of people because we can relate to that we can relate to it. And the question that is presented always. It's the question that's answered in the hymn that Tom has selected. If you look at the title, it says, I have decided to follow Jesus. Well, you're not going to say, I have, unless a question has been posed to you. And the question